Hey everyone, thought I would do a little reading today from my new book, which is called The Invisible Hand. It's a little book. It's about 100 pages of short stories from Hamilton Stone Editions in New Jersey. And yeah, I'll read a story. I'd like to say a few words about it first. First of all, the title, The Invisible Hand. Um, Several people have asked me, so is this your book about laissez-faire capitalism? And I said, no, not exactly, but you'll see what it's about. And actually, it's one of the main themes in this particular collection is fatherhood, and all the stories in the collection revolve around fathers and fatherhood in some way. Also like to thank Hamilton Stone Editions, as well as Meredith Sue Willis and Lou Robinson, who did the wonderful cover. And I'd also like to just say a few quick words about short fiction before I start reading, which is, this is a collection of short stories, and I'm a big proponent of short fiction, as you all may know. And some people say, well, why not write a novel and write a longer form? And I do those things too, but I just think that short fiction is a more elegant form, honestly, and it allows me to really kind of explore some different motifs and themes, and to really use sort of an album concept, if you will. So if you think of the musical equivalent of novels being maybe an opera or a symphony or something much longer with multiple subplots and twists and turns, short stories are lean and mean, like a 2 or 3 or 4 minute rock song or pop song. And for me, I'd much rather listen to A Day in the Life by the Beatles than a symphony. That's just my personal aesthetic, I guess. Also, it allows authors to really link motifs and link themes within a book. So this particular book has a fatherhood theme, and allows me to use that theme throughout. So anyway, I'm going to read this little story. It's the title story called The Invisible Hand. And I guess the inspiration behind the story is just an exploration of this kind of mysterious figure of the father here in the story. 1. Is there a story? An obituary doesn't tell the story of a life, it provides a portrait. Tell a portrait, that should be my goal. Long before we met, I followed my father. I was a young, inquisitive guy, 18 or 19. I was sort of a passive skeptic who silently questioned everything around me. I failed to verbalize my questioning. I took note. The weekend days on which my father vanished, they multiplied. He would drive off in the morning glare, sunglasses on, a cooler of food occupying the front seat. He never told us where he was headed. Just out for a drive, he'd say, with a tone of even neutrality. The fact that he'd return 8 hours later, however, gave me pause. I had heard of polygamists, men with other secret wives, other families. I suspected the worst. Don't you wonder? I asked my mother. This was the beginning of her illness. In retrospect, I wonder if he knew. It's not my business, Frankie, she'd say. She'd embrace me, then pull back and pat my shoulders. The bureau needs dusting. She'd spend all day Saturday, every Saturday, cleaning. It was her therapy. This, for some reason, rent my heart in two. I thought of her as a martyr. I thought of my father as an overlord. I made my decision. 2. Author Sutton Lowe was in insurance. He insured others, assured them also. I somehow grew up thinking my father's job as his chosen religion. What he did, he was. However, even as a young child, I was deeply uninterested in the day-to-day happenings at the office. Come dinner time, my father would occasionally discuss the performance of this or that insurance salesman, or recount the damage done by a certain fire, or the ins and outs of a car accident. Fires, car accidents, robbery. I should have been captivated by the bird's eye view my father provided for us. Yet this was not so. Primarily, this was not so because my father spoke softly in a kind of hushed mumble. Also, he frequently told his stories out of sequence. They were a hash. As I matured into my teenage years, my father eventually ceased discussing work altogether. Perhaps my mother sensed my lack of interest. Perhaps my father had simply given us all the angles we needed on his life at the office. Perhaps he simply shared the intimate details later with my mother. At any rate, when my mother asked him how his day went, his answer would invariably go, "Not bad." Later in the evening, my father would turn the baseball game on low and read a biography. He is fascinated by the intimate details of famous strangers, Napoleon, Tolstoy, Charles V, Einstein. Nursing a rum and water, he'd sit in his green upholstered armchair, reading and casually watching the game out of the corner of his eye. By 11, I'd see the book splayed face down on the floor, and my father would, empty glass in hand, be fast asleep. My mother would flip the lamp off, withdraw the glass from his hand, and lead him to bed. I would remain, flipping the television from channel to channel rapidly until my mother told me I had school in the morning. I can still smell the worn fibers of that rug. 3. My father, if you must know, was what many would consider a handsome man. He simply had little, if any, awareness of this brute fact. His defining trait, he wore large rimless glasses as if the glass ovals floated invisibly on his face. The scraggly map of his curly hair was exacerbated by his mangy sideburns. He wore lime green suits, chocolate brown blazers, clunky shoes, which he likely purchased from Goodwill. My father also wore heavy, musk-based cologne. I recall my mother telling him one day that married men don't usually wear such things. The purpose of cologne, she said, laughing, is to use that musky, secretive scent to attract a mate. This is the purpose of musk. You already have me. What do you need cologne for? My father's insistence helped lead to my suspicions. 4. The day I followed my father was breezy and cool, one of those mid-May dream days, yet cooler than you'd expect in the 60s. The sky was clear, the sun dazzled, the tree boughs overhead oscillated back and forth. I hovered 5 or 6 cars back, hoping to cloak myself. He drove and drove, took the highway west into the mountains. The traffic thinned and the horizon opened ahead of us. I had to lurk half a mile back so he didn't see me. I listened to Chopin's piano sonatas. I'm not usually inclined to classical music, but I wanted something hushed to calm my pulsing heart. 5. My father's father called it the invisible hand. I think he confused the concept with Adam Smith's, but his conflation stuck with me. You should always lead with an invisible hand, he said. I can still picture him leaning over the fire as he said this, prodding the embers. You don't need to say much to be a leader, he said. You just do what you do, and the followers will fall in behind. That's the way it works. Then he sat in his maroon lazy boy. I sat on the floor eyeballing the sparks. My father sat in the other armchair, hands clasped politely at his waist. We stayed like this for a long time. My father drank a mug of hot water. The steam clouded his glasses. How's your car running? It's good, I said. It's fine. The wood burned hot and crackled. Never let other people dictate your life for you, he said. Call the shots when you have them. Every time. He jabbed at the air with his forefinger. 6. My father was duty bound. Anytime a funeral arose, he was there. If a neighbor needed a hand, he had one to lend. In many respects, he was a man from another era. Though he was just a boy in the 1950s, it marked him. In my youth, we spent many days on the baseball field. He drove me back and forth, to and fro. He would stay and watch, but always from the car. I'd see him waving to me from behind the steering wheel. It was unnerving, as if at any moment he might decide to take off. Parents volunteered to bring snacks for the players. They rotated. When my father's turn came up, he brought a bag of ice. The boys looked at the bag quizzically. Is there something in the ice? One of my teammates finally asked, or what? Just frozen water, my father said, which is what ice is. Oh, the boys said. A few chomped on squares of ice out of politeness. Nice and cold, one boy said. Good ice. 7. When Mom died, he seemed hesitant to reminisce. Our neighbors would arrive armed with pies and brownies and casseroles and offers to provide a helping hand. She was such a good person, they proclaimed. He cut them off, thanked them for their attention. My father looked forward. For this reason, he rarely, if ever, took photographs. Odd, I know. I stored up here, he said. He didn't seem to wallow deep in mourning, but then it was so difficult to ever tell what he thought or felt. The only noticeable change my father made was that he became an active gardener. Growing up, looming oaks and maples flanked my parents' house. Where other neighbors cut down the trees, my parents liked the cool shade, the lowered electric bill in the summer. However, the yard frequently looked scraggly, moss and dirt. Grass didn't grow. A few months after my mother died, my father bought landscaping stones and a bevy of hostas. He positioned the stones around the yard in beautiful clusters and planted around them. He purchased a lawn bench, shade flowers, small koi pond. I imagine sometimes, knowing my father was not a man of great sentimentality, that the bond was dedicated to my mother, affixed with a plaque and back. However, my father never went this far. He never did. 8. He turned on a side road. I saw a brown state park sign. I had to stay back lest he spot me. I followed him down the forest road through patches of sun and shadow. In places, crows hunkered along the shoulder. My father entered the state park entrance. I pulled off onto the shoulder so that I could swoop in, catch him unawares. I imagined a melodramatic scene. My father with another woman in his arms, my poor sick mother at home, biding her time until her unfaithful husband deigned to show his face again. I waited 5 minutes. Everything pulsated. At the end of 5 minutes, I counted to 100, took a deep breath, and pulled my car into the park entrance. My father retired several years ago to North Dakota, of all places. He lived for a while in a small double wide in a small town, waiting for the construction company to build his home. The problem is, he told me on the phone, there just aren't that many people out here. Many men would complain of the cold and desolation. My father chose this desolation. That many people, my father chose this desolation, something about him. I told my father I'd visit him once the house was finished. I haven't yet. I imagine my father in 4 layers of clothes, watching game shows on a crackling television with bad reception, drinking whiskey from a smudged glass. This, I think, is a misconception. Still, what does one do out in North Dakota, 2,000 miles from his family? He's an island. 10. I would say friends and family. If my father had friends, he never did. He invested his time and energy in 1, his wife, 2, me, and 3, his work. End of story. Friends, he used to say, they're fine. They just don't keep you warm at night. 11. I drove around the loopy park entrance looking for my father's green station wagon. After making a complete circuit, I didn't see him anywhere, not parked in front of any of the cabins, not parked in front of a hiking trail. I was at a loss. But I decided to circle back one more time. I had driven all this way, and I didn't want to simply give up or give in. I thought perhaps he had driven down some hidden driveway only he knew about, his rendezvous. On my second circuit, I suddenly saw his station wagon off to the left, tucked back behind some picnic benches. I must have completely overlooked it. When I pulled into the parking lot, he turned and he saw me. He was sitting on a rock watching the creek alone. He was by himself. I didn't know what to do, so I stopped the car and let it idle. He looked at me over his shoulder. This pose will be forever emblazoned in my mind. And then he turned back. My father sat there watching this creek. He was alone. I never asked him about the park. I was too ashamed. I knew I had somehow let him down. My mother later, before she died, told me he had never been unfaithful to her. I believe her now. 12. What is the story? Is there a story? I don't know. I'm telling you all this in hopes you'll understand. As you know, he won't be there when we walk down the aisle. He won't send his regards. My father is just a different kind of person. He's not a bad man. He is built in a certain way for unknowable reasons, and really, I can't possibly begin to speculate. But he lived his life the way he wanted, I suppose, breath to breath. Someday, you can accompany me out there to meet him. You'll clasp my hand and you'll be nervous. He doesn't ask about me. He won't ask about you. He's growing deaf in one ear regardless. He'll be taciturn and he will seem steely and foreboding. We'll acclimate. We're in this together from tomorrow on.